I had been waiting a long time for Simon Foster's Affinity Designer Solid Foundations course, and I was not disappointed. The section on using Affinity Designer as a pathway to PowerPoint introduced new concepts, but I was uneasy. It was good as far as it went, but would it translate to being a useful tool for developing PowerPoint presentations in practice? I decided to explore. This video takes the form of a PowerPoint presentation. The fundamental questions we're addressing are: can Affinity Designer be used to improve the quality of a PowerPoint presentation? Is the process of preparing a PowerPoint presentation easier if the basic structure is developed in Affinity Designer? And is it worth the effort? These questions arose from a Udemy course that I purchased for about £12 that had been put together by Simon Foster. Simon Foster's Solid Foundations course contains altogether some 17.5 hours of video. The course is basic, but leads on to more advanced workflows. The section on presentations works well so far as it goes, but if you map the ideas onto PowerPoint, then it misses a few tricks which are nothing to do with Affinity. That said, it does cover artboards, symbols, templates, and quite a few other things about choosing colours for presentations and so on. The scenario is a designer presenting an idea to a client, which is an interesting way of explaining things. But when I'm using something like PowerPoint, I'm both the designer and the client because I'm preparing the presentation for myself. So, do I need this extra complexity? But I thought that there was something useful in here. So could it be developed? And if so, would it then be a useful tool for creating PowerPoint presentations? As most of this presentation does not directly relate to Affinity Designer, but applies to its application to presentations, particularly PowerPoint, Simon suggested I should publish it separately. However, I've had the benefit of discussing the issues with him. That said, there is no commercial arrangement between us, and all views expressed are my own. I was very grateful for Simon's encouragement and support. So let me try and explain the issues. This is a slide sequence from Simon's tutorial. Slide 00 is a summary slide. 01 as it first appears, 02 is the next appearance, and so on. But in PowerPoint it is possible and usually desirable to animate the change from one instance to another. When the change is adding something, it is usually done by an animation within one slide which has a number of layers. But the change from slide 5 to slide 6 is a change of topic, and this is handled in PowerPoint with a transition. I took Simon's display here on his artboards and turned it into a PowerPoint show, assuming that each of these images is copied and pasted into a PowerPoint without any animations or transitions. And the result looks a bit like this. Beware, Simon's got a bit of a sense of humour, and he has had a few amazingly pompous marketing departments as clients. Now, because each slide overlays the previous one, it's difficult to align them, and this causes the slight wobble. This is what Simon would call an uncertainty failure, and it distracts the audience. And please be careful when pronouncing the brand name, which is supposed to be a male deodorant. The important point to realise is that from now on we're focusing on the needs of PowerPoint rather than the Affinity Designer skills that Simon was concentrating on. I felt that with a little polishing, the ideas could be turned into a useful tool for presentation building. This is my layout of the same artboards. It differs from the tutorial in a few simple ways which I'll try and explain, so let's go in just a little bit closer to make it easier. First, each row is a single slide. The panels in each slide row are numbered 01.00 for the summary. It's almost a scrap pad where you can build the slide up. 01.01 is then the first that will appear. It's the first instance that will appear. Then we have the vertical animation panel that explains what animation will take place between 01.01 and 01.02 and so on through the rest of the slide. At the end of each slide row is a script panel. This will not be included in the presentation, but allows the context to be explained. It will also contain any information to be added by the presenter not shown on the slide. This panel will help anyone looking at the presentation understand why certain actions are being taken. I've also invented a direction panel to allow helpful instructions to be added, and in fact there ought to be a direction panel in this row explaining that only the last item is added after each transition, not the whole slide. Below the O1 slide roll there is a small panel to show what the transition will be between slide 01 and slide 02. Slide 02 is more pictorial, and so it just has a small direction panel to explain what's going to happen with it, and of course a script panel to give some helpful notes. Now we can have a look at this and see what it looks like in practice. I think you'll see that this is a much smoother presentation. No doubt a good designer would have added some of these effects, but the presentation I have used allows the presentation to be fully agreed with the client. If, as in my case, I am the client, I can get all the design details written down so that if I ever want to go to the presentation again, I've got it all recorded in full. This is a presentation that I built using the principles I learned from Simon's tutorial and using the enhancements I have described. During the course of this exercise, I've discovered a few potholes and a few shortcuts, and I will use this Iroise presentation as a source of examples because I own the copyright to all the images used, or the images are basically public. The overall conclusion is that a formal approach to presentations using Affinity Designer as a precursor is beneficial, especially for pictorial style presentation. The timings are in the notes, so it is easy to refer back. Now I'm afraid we're going to have to make a slight diversion because as this presentation developed, I realized that long bullet lists were a problem and a more specific template was needed. This sequence will show not only how the template was constructed, but how the Affinity artboards make it easy to make even a major change to the presentation. This was the standard slide template that I've been using, which has got a nice title, a very nice textured background that was suggested by Simon, body text area, and the opportunities to add lists. But the difficulty is in transferring this from the artboards into the PowerPoint presentation. So I took a slightly different approach. The first thing I had to do was to make some room to put this new slide in. So all the other artboards for the rest of the presentation had to be selected and moved down and renumbered as well. And by the way, the easiest way to renumber is from the back. Then we took from Simon's main template a copy. That will become slide 09.00. But first of all, we have to get it into the right place in the stack. So we have to take the one that's selected, move it, drag it down until we can find 09. Oh, a bit far. There we are, slide 09.00. We will use that in a minute to build the new template, but first we actually have to make a copy of that to become slide 09.01, the first that will be on display. Check that we've got the whole slide in the stack, and then we slide it across with Alt-click, and that then has to be moved down so it becomes 09.01. Now we go back to 0900 and modify it. And the way we're going to modify it is to tighten up using the transform the text box so that it only just contains the body text item. This means reducing the body text, and you'll see that gradually going up as I use the middle wheel to adjust the height. Next, make sure it's selected and duplicate it. Now this is what's called the power duplicate method, which is described in detail in Simon's presentation. The next stage, having duplicated, is to use the transform panel to move the second one down, and the copy down to where we want it. And by using Ctrl-J, we get a repeat not only of the object but also of the transform. So now we have got evenly laid out on that template. So that's the template. It was as easy to create as that. But now we've got to make sure that it's safe. So we use Alt-Drag again to move it off to the side where we keep all the other templates and rename it as List Template. That then has to be dragged up the stack to where we park all the templates at the top. I've chosen to put it under the main template. Then we can return to our description of how to do it. So the next thing we're going to need is an animation box. And the best way to do that is to find a similar one somewhere else in the, on the artboard display, and using Shift and Alt you can drag up a new one, and because it's got Shift on it you know it's going to be on the same vertical line. That then has to be found in the stack because it will be with its original. There it is, illuminated, and dragged up so that it sits after 0901. There we are. It then needs to be renamed as 0901 to 0902. This is slightly out of sequence, but the one thing the artboards will not do is include videos. What we have to do is to put a placeholder template into the slide sequence. And this is one I've copied from a later slide because I hadn't discovered that I needed this template at that time. So it has to go in there and it becomes 0902. Now I could possibly have just changed the text inside that box to say what video goes in there, but I actually chose to use a directions box instead. And I copied that from a nearby place where there happened to be a directions box, because it makes it easier to manipulate it in the stack. And the text is changed to insert video when I can spell properly. And it is as simple as that, providing you change the numbering and move the directions box into the right place in the stack. So it comes after there. That is also needs to be put into the right place in the stack. There it is. That was where we did that duplication. So that has to go in. There. Right. and that's then renumbered 0902, and the directions one is also directions 0902. So that has illustrated how these rows are built up, and it's also illustrated the creation of this new template. So I hope that was helpful, and we can now get back to the story. Once I've finished renaming that video slide. Right, we're going to list a few of the tips, tricks and potholes that we're going to encounter in the next few minutes. The first is that the standard sizes that are available in Affinity Designer don't actually match the 4x3 size on PowerPoint. So it's a good idea to fiddle that so that the two do come together. It saves an enormous amount of time, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. You will see that most of the process of putting these artboards together is copying similar things from one place to another and adjusting them. The best way to do that is to use Alt-Drag, and I'll show you again how to do that and how to duplicate the templates and the slides and put it all together. Next, a bit of a pothole. Sometimes you want to include a company logo or badge, or in my case with yacht clubs, a burgee on more or less every slide. So if I want to go and use that same presentation at another yacht club, I have to change them all. It would be very nice if that could be a symbol. Unfortunately, most of these badges are available as bitmaps, not as vectors. And the trouble is that vectors are needed to make a symbol. It's very tempting to think that a grid would be really helpful, but the grid only shows in certain circumstances in Affinity Designer, and frankly, I abandoned it in favor of just relying on the snapping. But I'll demonstrate to you how the grid works. You've seen a few instances already of directions panels. They can make a big saving in the amount of instances that you actually have to put onto the artboards. Finally, the main process of going from the artboards to PowerPoint is copy and paste, but there are some issues. First of all, if you copy an entire slide, you lose the layers, it's flattened. So once it's gone onto PowerPoint, you can't do anything with it. If you want to animate the items in a list, you can't. So we'll show how to deal with that. The alternative is to select layers one at a time if you want to animate them. But you will also find that if you try and copy the layers from the actual artboard, you'll get yourself into a tangle very quickly. You have to control the layers that you select from the layer stack on the right-hand side of the screen. The other thing I discovered is that if a layer has got an adjustment layer on it, then it may not copy properly. PowerPoint doesn't recognize the adjustment, of course. You may have to pop back into Affinity Photo in order to put that right. I'll demonstrate that too. So let's deal with the first one. So the first of our tips and tricks is to match the artboard size to the PowerPoint size. Imagine that you're setting one up for the first time. The obvious one to choose is XGA, which is 1024 by 768 4x3. So just for fun, let's just put a straight rectangle across that screen. Give it some color for fun, and make sure in the transform box that it's 1024 by 768. That's the correct size. Now we'll copy that and then switch over to PowerPoint. Then I'm going to just resize this a bit to give us a bit more room around the edges so we can see what's going on. Now we paste that rectangle in, and if we slide it across, we'll see that it isn't the same size as the PowerPoint slide. I came to the conclusion the easiest thing to do was to adjust PowerPoint. So you go into Design and then into Page Setup. And I discovered, after a bit of trial and error, that the width needed to be 27.2 and the height 20.4. With other presentation software, it may be slightly different. Now the thing is that you've also adjusted the size of the red rectangle, so you have to delete that and paste it again. But when you do, you'll see that it is the exact size. So we can save that, and we've called it, I've called mine, XGA PPT template. So when you're starting a new PowerPoint presentation, you start from that, not from the normal PowerPoint situation. And on to our next trick. Most of the process of putting the artboards together is duplicating very similar things and then making a slight adjustment. So the best way to do this is to use Alt and drag to move similar bits from here to there. And I'll demonstrate this like so. Here we have got our 11.00 slide. This is the one we're actually showing right now. And to duplicate it, use Alt and drag and snap it into place using the snapping. But you then find that it was in the wrong place in the layer stack. So first of all, it has to be renumbered as 11.01 and dragged down to underneath 11. Now we want to transition, and we can get that from the layer above because it's exactly the same. And I hadn't, when I put this video together, learnt the trick of using Shift and Alt drag to make sure that it stays in the same vertical line. But that's an improvement on what you see here. Now that animation will be associated with slide 10, not with slide 11, so it has to be moved down like this so that it sits underneath 11, and then you have to change the label to animation 11.01 to animation 11.02. Now I've mentioned before that you can't actually put videos onto the artboard, so you have to put a placeholder slide in, and we've got one nearby, so we just drag that down, snap it into place, and you'll see that it's again in the wrong place, so it has to be dragged down to slide 11, and then its label changed to 11.02, but I think in this case I changed the label first, the title first. There we are, Alt drag. Now we go in and we change the slide name from 10.02 to 11.02, except I've made a mess of it. That's better. Finally, we need a script box at the end of the row. Now you could go and find the template, but it's a long way away and it would involve a lot of dragging. So the easiest thing to do is to find the script box nearby and simply Alt drag that one into place, delete the text that's in it, and rename it. And very simple script box in this case, because most of the scripting will be done during the video. Now, having done all that, I find it's useful to put all those new bits into a group. The main reason being is it shortens the length of the stack when you have to move things up and down the stack, and the other thing is that it protects those items from accidental error. Now you'll notice that I have left the script box out of this slide, so I have to open the group up again and correct that situation by dragging the script into the group. This is a slight problem that you need to take into account when planning your presentation, and I'll try and explain what I mean. Now here you see the standard main template that I used for the Iroise presentation, and incidentally almost the same as the one I used for this presentation. It's got all the various layers in it that you would expect to see: the title, the body text, and the lists. It's a very good template, and it's based on the one designed by Simon. But the addition here is this burgee, this badge. It could be any badge, but it's because I was going to give this presentation to a yacht club, and that's the burgee of the yacht club. Now, that's all very well, but if I wanted to give the same presentation to a different yacht club a year later, I'd want to change that. Now, if it was a symbol, that would be easy. I would just change the symbol and it would be automatically changed on all the slides. But because it's a bitmap, I can't. I have got to go into each slide individually, delete it and replace it with another one. That's a bit of a pity. Here you say, a professional would say, well, why don't you vectorize it? Why don't you turn it into a vector and then it could become a symbol? Well, yes, but you know, it's a very difficult and intricate design, and I think that if I zoom in a bit, you might be able to see that. There you go. I don't think that would be very easy to vectorize at all. Moving on, it's sometimes nice to have a grid, either to help arrange the artboards themselves or to look at objects within artboards. Unfortunately, the way that Affinity Designer works, I found this so confusing that in the end I didn't use the grid. I simply used the snapping capabilities and found that that was enough for the purpose. However, I am going to demonstrate exactly how the things work and what you can do about it. There's a bit of a workaround here. As you can see, there's no grids there, but if we go and look to view and switch on the grids, you'll see that the grid is in any selected artboard, and it's within the artboard, not between the artboards. But there are ways of getting around this. So if in fact I draw a vector object, in this case just a very simple line, then you will find that the grid appears all over the entire screen. But if I then try to select an object, to move it onto the grid disappears again. This isn't very helpful. But what you can do, and this is why I created a vertical line, is that you can move the vertical line to where you want to snap to, say, I don't in this particular case, and then you can drag the object that you want to that line. But so far as I'm concerned, that's all a bit of a fiddle, and I've preferred not to bother and just rely on the snapping. Directions panels can save a lot of time and avoid a lot of almost unnecessary instances of artboards to explain small points. And here are a few examples. This is a very simple example when there is a sequence which is clear and the presenter will mainly read or comment on each point. Then a direction can be used. In this case, it saved 6 slide panels and 5 animation panels with little loss of clarity. This is an instance where a video clip is to be inserted. You've already seen this a couple of times, and it cannot be included on the artboard as such, so the directions panel coupled with the placeholder make it quite clear. The final one is a case where there is a list, but it's to be revealed all at once. In other words, you don't want to go down point by point, so you just put a direction in to say single swipe down, and that covers it. So the directions panels are flexible and aid building a presentation without incorporating unnecessary detail. The basic process of transcribing the artboards onto PowerPoint slides is simply to copy and paste. The following sequence illustrates 3 common types of copy and paste. The first is simple. There is no animation, so all the objects can be copied from the artboard to the PowerPoint slide at the same time. The second clip shows a slide where the number and distribution of the towns is an important point, so each one comes in separately with its own animation. The third slide is an example of where an Affinity photo adjustment layer has been used to highlight part of the chart. This did not copy properly, so you have to switch to Affinity Photo to correct the problem, as will be demonstrated. Examine these in detail. The first one is that if you copy all the layers or a number of layers from your artboard onto the PowerPoint slide, it's pasted on there flattened. You can't manipulate the layers thereafter. And that's quite easy to illustrate with this particular slide. Here you see on the right we are selecting the layers we want to copy, which is all of them within the slide. We go to copy, then switch over to the PowerPoint presentation and set up a new empty slide and then paste. There you have exactly what you want, because you don't want to animate anything on it. But if you try to move anything around, the whole slide moves. It is just one single operation. Where there is an animation on a slide, you need to be very careful to select which layers are transferred. If you try and do this from the artboard itself, you'll quickly get into trouble. It is absolutely imperative to select the layers from the layer stack on the right hand side of the screen. That way you are absolutely sure which layers you are getting. Now let's have a look at this in practice. Here you see that the static background is the chart plus the burgee. So we select those 2 layers, copy, switch to PowerPoint. Oh, look, we've still got the old one there, so we add a new blank slide and paste. They're static, they're not going to move at all. Then each layer is copied one at a time to the PowerPoint slide. It's placed in the middle automatically. You drag it to where it's wanted and add an animation. We're using fly in and we'll use various directions to do this. Then you go back to the artboard. Now you see the advantage of the new template that we created for lists. It makes life a lot easier. Now this is fairly repetitive, so after this one I'm going to speed it up. Each layer is copied separately, pasted into PowerPoint, relocated, and an animation added. And finally, we can test to see the effect in action. And it's done exactly what we want. So now we can move on to the last of the examples. If you have happily used adjustment layers to modify the images in your artboards, you will find that they don't copy very well onto PowerPoint, and I will just illustrate this. Here is a slide where I used a nice little trick from Olivier Saracas to highlight an area that I want to talk about. So once again, we establish which layers form the background, and it is the burgee, the map, and the adjustment. So we copy them and then paste them into the PowerPoint slide, and oh dear, the adjustment has disappeared. So what are we going to do about that? It's pretty obvious if you think about it that PowerPoint is unlikely to recognize Affinity adjustments. But what are we going to do? We could go back and rebuild that image altogether, or we can do another thing. We can go into Affinity Photo. Now I'm going to not speed this up. I'm going to show you how long it takes to load, because when you do this from your artboards, it loads all the artboards, not just the one that you're interested in, and it does take quite a long time. Of course, all this could have been avoided if there had been a copy flattened function in Affinity Designer, but there isn't. But there you are, you see, there's all the artboards. So now you've got to go and dig through that lot and find the slide that we're interested in. Aha, there it is. So we've got to then find it in the layer stack. We can see that it is slide 8. We open up slide 8 and we look at the layers that we want and we copy them, and we have to produce a new Affinity Photo object, paste them into place, then go to Edit, Copy Flattened, and paste that onto the PowerPoint slide. That's fine. That solved the problem. I'd just like to have another look at lists. This is a slide that I used at the end of my Iroise presentation, and you can present something like this in a number of ways. You could go through it line by line, you could show the whole thing, or you can look at it in a different way. There's the slide at the top, which you can see. Now, initially, you can choose to go down all the way down in one go, or you might want to do block by block like that. So I've included a copy of the list template down below. First thing to do is change the title. Now, the next thing we want to do is to include the first 6 or 7 lines at once. So you delete those lines from your list template and draw down that box. And now you set them up to copy the words. First of all, make sure that you've got list 1 selected. Then you change to list 2, which is the indented part, and you simply add the items. As you can see, it's slowly filling up the box. Then you do exactly the same thing for the next box where you need 2 lines. So that's what you do. You cut out the next 2 lines and you draw the box down, and then you add the text. And then the final one, the additional material. There is the odd spelling error in there, and I in fact corrected that as we go through. So, in order to get this presented into PowerPoint, we first of all set up the static material as we've done before. You copy, and you go to PowerPoint, and it's already there actually, but you paste that in. Then you come back to the first block, copy it, paste it, and then maneuver it. Note that in PowerPoint there is a snapping center line, which is sometimes a little bit hard to find. There we are, there it is. Oops, it moved. There we are, near enough. That's right, set the animation for that box. Then we go to the next box, copy it, paste it in place, and drag it down, looking again for that snapping center line. Animate it. And the final one, copy it, paste it into PowerPoint, drag it down and look for that snapping center line. And add the animation. So we can have a look and see how this works. There's your slide. There's, it shows you charts in one hit, guest photos, and the additional material. Well, you will be pleased to hear that I have now reached the end of tips, tricks, and potholes, including the extra item that I added to the list later. The question is, was it worth it? On balance, I think so. I certainly found that putting together this complex presentation was helped a lot by having all the material laid out in artboard form. If you made a mistake or got into trouble or wanted to make a major edit, it enabled you to sort it out in a logical way. So I think I should be using these artboards again for future PowerPoint presentations. There are 1 or 2 issues related to Affinity Designer that bear thinking about. For a start, I think it's a pity that there isn't a copy flattened function in Affinity Designer as there is in Affinity Photo. The next thing is that if you're looking at an artboard in Affinity Designer and you've got an image that you want to re-edit in Affinity Photo, it seems a shame that you have to open the entire set of artboards as a project in Affinity Photo and that you can't just open that single artboard to work on. That would be another thing that I would like to see. Bitmap images as symbols we've mentioned as a slight problem, but I think it would be rather nice to see that happen. Okay, there we go. That's the end of it. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it interesting or useful. And now I can relax a little. Thank you. Bye-bye.